Oh, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm so grateful. I really am. Thank you. Um, this is odd, hearing someone describe what I do in everyday life. Um, I I was in two minds as to what kind of title to give my paper today. And so in the end, I actually gave it two titles. And my first title is If You Don't Love Trees, You Don't Love God. That's the kind of family friendly title, if you like. And the other title is not so family friendly, at least at first sight, but it's only first sight. And then I hope that I'll be able to explain it in such a way that it will become as family friendly as any title one could wish. The second title that I gave this talk was Nonstop Erotic Beauty Leads to Ecstasy. Which of those I prefer depends on my mood on the day. Anyway, my theme today is not really honoring nature, but it's loving nature, establishing a personal erotic relationship with the whole of creation and the ecstasy that this loving embrace may lead to, in this mutual self-abandonment of myself to nature and nature to myself. It is this mutual self-abandonment of myself to nature, nature to myself, which may save us and the world we live in. It is, however, a slow process, and indeed it will never end, continuing, deepening, expanding forever. This is an ecology which includes the afterlife, as it should, really. Any ecological practice which does not continue into the afterlife is not truly worthy of the term ecology. And at the center of it all is, as I say, love. Callista Swear, who's a great Eastern Orthodox theologian, has written that love is the only true answer to our ecological crisis. For we cannot save what we do not love. But there is no genuine love without costly self-sacrifice. And to give you a flavor of what Ware is talking about, I'd like to read to you his account of love of trees. And Callistus Ware writes, on the holy mountain of Athos, that's in northeastern Greece, on the holy mountain of Athos, the monks sometimes put up beside the forest paths special signposts offering encouragement or warning to the pilgrim as he passes. One such notice used to give me particular pleasure. Its message was brief and clear: love the trees. Father Amphiliokos, who died in 1970, the geronta or elder on the island of Patmos, when I first stayed there, would have been in full agreement. Do you know, he said, that God gave us one more commandment which is not recorded in scripture. It is the commandment, love the trees. Whoever does not love trees, so he believed, does not love God. When you plant a tree, he insisted, you plant hope, you plant peace, you plant love, and you will receive God's blessing. And Callistus Ware goes on, Father Amphiliokos was by no means the first spiritual leader in the modern Greek tradition to recognize the importance of trees. 2 centuries earlier, the Athonite monk, St. Cosmas the Aetolian, martyred in 1779, used to plant trees as he traveled around Greece on his missionary journeys. And in one of his prophecies, he stated, people will remain poor because they have no love for trees. Well, here's Elder Sosima. Elder Sosima is a fictional monk, and he appears in Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. Elder Sosima says, each leaf, each sunbeam of God, love it. Love the animals, love the plants, love every object. And finally, my final quotation in this opening is from Thomas Traherne, who is a 17th century English poet, a priest, Anglican theologian. And Thomas Traherne wrote, love is the true means by which the world is enjoyed. our love to others, and others' love to us. We ought therefore, above all things, to get acquainted with the nature of love, for love is the root and foundation of nature. There are many glorious excellencies in the material world, but without love, they are all abortive. There are many glorious excellencies in the material world, but without love, they are all abortive. If love is the root and foundation of nature, then all living things depend on it. Remove it, and as Traherne says, everything in and of the world is stillborn, a dead thing. As will have become clear, perhaps, my ideas are profoundly influenced by the theology of the Eastern Orthodox Church. This is little known in the West, having been marginalized, and I think I can also say colonized, literally and metaphorically, for centuries. This is a shame, as it preserves much which has been lost in the spiritual practice of the Western churches to their and our detriment. I would like, however, to start at the beginning, or at least very close to it, and explore two contrasting ways of relating to nature as described in Genesis. The first is the archetypal moment of natural beauty calling to the human heart and summoning forth love and cosmic ecstasy. While the second is the archetype of the rapacious instrumentalizing of nature, reducing it to a dead object so that it can be turned into a means to an end, nothing more. According to Genesis, God, having created the world and everything in it, sees that it is all good. The Greek Septuagint translation of the original Hebrew text uses the word kalos to describe this goodness. Kalos means good. The term also means beautiful, and it stems from the verb kaleo, to call. So the goodness of creation is displayed in its beauty, which is called into existence by God and which calls out to us. Having created the first human, God invites Adam to participate in creation by naming the birds and the animals. He, and I'm quoting now, he brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them, and whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. Now, this is not an act of domination, and nor does Adam capture and kill the creatures in order to know them. Rather, they call to him in and through their beauty, the goodness and beauty of their presence. This then calls out of him their name. And receiving this, the animals and birds know their name and consequently become more and more their true, their essential selves. Becoming more themselves, they become more beautiful, and so call out ever more to Adam, who knows them ever more deeply. This is mutual embrace. This is love. St. Ephrem the Syrian, who was around in the 4th century, St. Ephrem the Syrian wrote, "The animals and birds came to Adam as though to a loving shepherd, passing in front of him without any fear. This kind of loving calls for the beautiful risk of vulnerability on both sides, as the animals offer themselves to be themselves, and Adam has to forget himself and all that he may want or like them to be, or indeed what he thinks God might want him to say. The beauty, that is, that calls to Adam breaks open his heart, and it breaks open himself so that he's able to step out of himself in ecstasy. Adam's ecstasy is an irresistible moving out of the usual place of himself. And this is, after all, what ecstasy means: out of place, out of the usual place. Adam's ecstasy is an irresistible moving out of the usual place of himself into something else, something rich and strange, and an unpredictable transformation into another self, his true self, offered as a gift by the beauty of the creatures. Offering themselves up to Adam, the creatures too undergo this ecstatic transformation, beginning the never-ending, non-stop erotic becoming of their true self. In the eyes of the Orthodox Church, Adam's true self, and that of the creatures and the whole of nature, is divine. The beauty that calls to Adam is God in the world, and it calls us to see God in the world and the world in God. This is St. Basil the Great, who's writing in the 4th century. St. Basil writes, "By the beauty of visible things, let us raise ourselves to him who is above all beauty." We, like Adam, are raised by the endless divine yearning, which is known as Eros. Eros is, in the words of Callistos Ware, intense and fervent longing for the divine. It is what St. Maximus the Confessor, who lived in the 7th century, it's what St. Maximus the Confessor called Eros maniakos, maniacal Eros, and what St. Gregory of Sinai referred to as longing for the divine, a spiritual intoxication. Cheers. A spiritual intoxication. Dionysius the Areopagite, or the pseudo-Dionysius, who was writing in around the 5th or the 6th century, described it thus: "This divine yearning brings ecstasy, so that the lover belongs not to self, but to the beloved." And he goes on to say that the lover possesses not his own life, but the life of the one for whom he yearned, as exceptionally beloved. A contemporary Greek Orthodox theologian and philosopher, Christos Yanaras, describes Eros thus. It is, he writes, the dynamic movement of loving self-offering. But it's something which is sometimes a little difficult to grasp, I find anyway, in a kind of a paradox which is there in the story of Adam, and a paradox which is typical of love in many ways. The more I abandon myself to another, the more I abandon myself to the beauty of an animal, to the beauty of a bird, to the beauty of a tree, to the beauty of the ocean, to the beauty of another person. The more I abandon myself to another, the more I approach my true self. And at the same time, not my true self. These things are difficult. I'm always in a different place from myself, but a place which is also closer to myself. That is, I'm always in the place that is called ecstasy, the place of ecstasy. This ecstatic love for the divine beauty manifested in nature is, in many ways, it's a kind of asceticism. Asceticism, if you like, is the practice of renunciation or self-sacrifice. It puts a stop to always putting myself and my desires first. Or another way of putting it is that it is the exercise of a choice not to indulge. It is the freeing of the self from compulsion, from having to do something, from needing, from requiring. It is the practice of freedom. Asceticism is called for, I think, if we want to end the despoliation of nature. We have to renounce our desire for more and more and more and more and ever more products, or energy, or fuel, whatever it happens to be. But asceticism alone is potentially, anyway, an act of will. And an act of will is a fragile thing, or a despotic thing at times. And this is why asceticism must always be the result of beauty calling to me, lighting the love which is in any case always already there. The love in me responds to the call of loving beauty, and loving beauty responds to my call. But you must not believe that ecstatic and erotic asceticism leads one to leave the world behind, or nature behind, or that particular animal, that particular bird, as if they were somehow secondary and not important. It's not a dualistic view, is what I'm saying, in which we leave behind the material world, or float away in bodiless fantasies or the realm of archetypes. St. Basil the Great wrote, "By the beauty of visible things, let us raise ourselves to him who is above all beauty." But he does not say that we should raise ourselves beyond the world. Raising ourselves to God, we are more than ever in the world and in nature. What happens is that love causes us to develop what Callistos Ware, drawing on William Blake, of course, calls double vision. As Ware explains, I'm quoting him, "By a strange paradox, the more a thing becomes transparent, the more it is uniquely itself." And he explains, "We are to perceive each kingfisher, each frog, each human face, each blade of grass in its uniqueness. Each is to be real for us. Each is to be immediate. We are to explore the variety and the particularity of creation." So when Adam studies the creatures and the birds, he's responding to them in all their specificity, but the beauty which calls to him in and through them is a revelation of the divine goodness of creation. At one and the same time, the creatures are, each and every one of them, utterly, utterly themselves, and also a theophany, a revelation of God. Adam, that is, sees a horse in all its peculiarity and particularity. He sees a horse and he sees God. Neither element, the horse or God, in this antinomy vanishes or is obscured. Indeed, the horse is only itself when it is in God and God is in the horse. It's a form of panentheism. It's not uncommon in Eastern Orthodoxy at all. Being divine, these loving relationships are infinite and eternal. They do not promise some nightmarish, endless stasis. What they do promise is a never-ending series of ecstasies, always dynamic, always changing, ecstasy after ecstasy after ecstasy. And how, indeed, can it be otherwise, as we gaze on the face of our beloved and experience their divine depths? We know that we know them and that we will never know them. Every ecstasy leads to another ecstasy. The high point is the beginning of another high point. And in some mysterious way, these high points, these ecstasies, continue into the afterlife. This way of loving then goes on forever and is never the same. As St. Gregory of Nyssa, who was around in the 4th century, writes, "We go from beginning to beginning by way of beginnings without end. Nor, whilst ascending, do we cease to desire more, knowing what we know. Rather, as we rise by a greater desire to one still higher, we continue on our way into the infinite by increasingly higher ascents." I hope you'll indulge me by allowing me to read that again, because I It's one of my favorite quotations. We go from beginning to beginning by way of beginnings without end. Nor whilst ascending do we cease to desire more, knowing what we know. Rather, as we rise by a greater desire to one still higher, we continue on our way into the infinite by increasingly higher ascents. Non-stop erotic beauty leads to non-stop ecstasy. This is an erotic ecology of the afterlife, as well as of many other things. It may seem to be an obscure, even irrelevant point. Why talk about the afterlife after all? But secular ecology has its own version. It imagines a future, excuse me, it imagines a future beyond our own lives for our descendants. This future, however, is usually, in essence, nothing more than a version of our present, a different version of our present world, projected into the future, better or worse perhaps, but little or no difference in quality. It lacks the utter freedom implied by the Orthodox vision of life in this world and beyond, as infinite transformation into something which is eternally new and always beyond our knowing. This view is necessary in order to escape the stasis of the material imagination. In the final analysis, the present is only sustainable if the afterlife is conceived of as a constant and unpredictable change. But Genesis also includes the archetypal scene of the rapacious instrumentalization of nature, reducing it to a dead object so that it can be turned into a means to an end and nothing more. This is the eating of the forbidden fruit. And this episode is not primarily at all about sexual shame. Rather, it's about possessing nature for me so that it becomes simply an object by which I hope to achieve my fantasized aims and fetishized pleasures. Eve eats the fruit, the text tells us, because she can, because it's appealing, and because it will make her wise. It calls out to her. It calls out to her with all its beauty, but she does not give herself to an erotic relationship. This is not the beginning of endless and endlessly surprising ecstasies. Rather, she desires to possess it, to use it for her own pleasure and her own imagined cravings. It is an object or pleasure device, and objects do not call us out of ourselves. Objects do not call us out of ourselves in infinite ecstatic transformation, nor do they themselves change endlessly. They are not alive, they are dead. Eve's pleasuring of herself begins the despoliation of the earth by greedy humans, and it kills the whole of creation, including us. Her grasping transforms the garden into the abattoir, as Alexander Schmemann, who's a 20th century theologian, as Alexander Schmemann writes, the world of nature, cut off from the source of life, that is God, is a dying world. For one who thinks food in itself is the source of life, eating is communion with the dying world. It is communion with death. Food itself is dead. It is life that has died, and it must be kept in refrigerators like a corpse. Or in the words of Elizabeth Theocritoff, the fall, we might say, solidifies man in his animal nature. It makes him merely a top predator, a consumer. The world around us is no longer a revelation of our and its creator, but a resource to satisfy our appetites. Pollution spreads out from the hand holding the apple to the whole of the world, killing it, and killing humans as part of it. Eve's using of nature closes the eyes of her heart and those of Adam's, so that she only sees surfaces without depth. And since surfaces can never satisfy our infinite erotic yearning, they, and after them we, must consume more and more and ever more, leaving us and the world in the disastrous condition of which we are all aware. So, what can be done? Well, no doubt to your great relief, I am not a priest, so I will not call out repent, though I may just whisper it in a small squeaky voice, repent. I teach at a university. I'm not a priest, I teach at a university. I try to educate. So I naturally turn to notions of education to open the heart of students to the ecstasy of endless loving beauty. I turn, that is, to the ancient notion of study. The great radical traditionalist and Roman Catholic priest, Ivan Illich, first made me aware of the foundational meaning of the word study in its form as a noun. He points out that the very first meaning of study given in the Oxford English Dictionary goes like this: affection, friendliness, devotion to another's welfare, partisan sympathy, desire, inclination, pleasure or interest felt in something. So the primary meaning of study has to do with a going out of the self and abandoning it for another. It has to do with desirous and pleasurable longing or yearning. It has to do with Eros and the ecstasy of Eros. Thus Dante, who was well aware of the implications of the word, could write in his Convivio that true study is the application of the mind to the thing it is in love with. The application of the mind to the thing that it is in love with. Study is an act akin to gazing on the face of someone we love. When Adam beheld the creatures, he studied them in this sense. They offered themselves in beauty to him, and he offered himself to them. They were in ecstasy. This dynamic erotic communion should never have ended. And perhaps education can once more crack open our hearts to this beauty, and thus change utterly our relation to each other and to the natural world, so that in fact others and the world are not just a series of potential pleasure devices, but living and beautiful persons in an endless love relationship. Education, that is, has to awaken Eros, though not perhaps the maniacal Eros that St. Maximus the Confessor refers to. My aims are more modest than provoking maniacally erotic reactions, and in any case, this phrase could be liable to provoke misunderstandings, shall we say. But one can pay attention to beauty, such as the choice of language that one employs. It's entirely, I'll just re-emphasize that, it's entirely doubtful whether beautiful language is specifically Christian. What I mean is it's not specifically Christian. It is, however, beautiful language is, however, profoundly and essentially poetic. Beauty in poetry points to something beyond the material, while finding it in the specific concrete images offered by the world. It is always itself and always endlessly reveals realities beyond itself. Indeed, the great French poet Paul Claudel understood Adam's naming of the creatures as the archetypal poetic act. Adam was the first poet, and true poetry is to see with the eyes of Adam, undistracted, yearning, ecstatically in love with nature. It is to see creation as indeed the earliest Christian fathers and mothers saw it, as an endless love poem, meant for us to read and reread, to heed and to treasure. This is what St. Porphyrius is a modern day Orthodox saint. He died, I think, in 1992. St. Porphyrius meant this when he said, for a person to become a Christian, he must have a poetic soul. He must become a poet. Christ does not wish insensitive souls in his company. Christ does not wish insensitive souls in his company. Only poets go to heaven. Everyone, I would say, should become a poet, to transform the world once more into paradise, to bring heaven down onto earth. We can then understand Bartholomew the First of Constantinople. He's the patriarch, the so-called patriarch of Constantinople. When Bartholomew the First says, when he calls for more poetry in our theology. And I would go well beyond that, however, and add that there should be more poetry in all subjects, from the most practical to the most philosophical. We should try to imagine what social sciences, geology, business studies, biology, economics, engineering, etc., what these subjects would be like if they were written and taught in poetry, or at least in prose poetry or prose poetry. What would they be like? And if that seems hard, we can at least recognize that education is poetic in essence and cannot be controlled. Meanwhile, beauty should be nurtured in all the elements of universities, such as in their architecture, in their furnishings, and their fittings. Drably utilitarian education factories and warehouses should be torn down and replaced with the kind of beautiful buildings which were once the norm for academia. This need not be expensive, at least one hopes not. It just means paying attention to forms which speak to the heart. Universities could then once more be places of study, in this full meaning that I tried to explain. Places of study, places which, that is, cultivate the love of learning and the learning of love. And as for my own educational practices and their bearing on nature and the love of nature, I don't really have time to go into them in great detail here, but suffice it to say, I have explored specific landscapes and indeed the campus of my own university with students, with colleagues, other interested parties through poetry, prose, image, folklore, myth, in the hope of transforming vision. We have, of course, also literally explored them too by walking them. My hope is to create a kind of holistic experience structured around a series of antinomies: mind and body, spirit and matter, presence and absence, past and present, etc. Through this, it's always been my aspiration to inspire a heartfelt relationship between student and creation, and to open the eyes of the studious heart. It was, however, never possible in advance to know whether that would actually occur. I mean, how could one know whether that would actually occur? As I said, education is not really a controllable practice. These things are completely, indeed, beyond control. I have, however, often been pleased by subsequent comments from participants in the activities. Informal written feedback has included reference to a walk taking a participant, and I quote, to another mode of experiencing the campus surroundings. Without prompting, another person described the way the walk opened inner eyes of imagination, while being a very sensory and erotic experience. One participant wrote of place informing experience and vice versa. And I was told that this should happen more often in life. I encourage students to reflect creatively on their experiences and express what they have learnt in a variety of ways, in art, in poetry, and or in more formal academic essays. They ask themselves whether the type of study they have encountered differs from that which they found elsewhere at school or university, and how too the kind of knowledge it creates may differ. In general, and whatever I am teaching, I hope through nurturing in myself and in students a particular quality of attention, by trying to nurture that particular quality of attention, to encourage love of what is being studied, so that whatever it is, whatever is being studied is not a means to an end, a thing to be consumed in order to achieve a fantasized future job. Instead, it is the beloved. If we fall in love with what we study, we will abandon ourselves to it, and it will reveal itself to us in ecstatic communion. It is my belief, my hope, anyway, that this quality of attention, once experienced, will be applied to the world in general, to other people, to nature. Finally, when we study nature, when we truly study it, it becomes unpredictable, and so do we, rewilded and endlessly so. We do not know where the next ecstasy will leave us standing, or how we will stand with the world and it's with us. Likewise, this talk can have no final, definite conclusion, only a pause for further study. And perhaps at that long yearned for moment of ecstasy where my voice ceases at last, we, like Adam, may hear beauty in all its goodness calling to us, and calling out of us love and an end to our quotidian selves, calling a self and a world into being, both of which are ever new and ever unpredictable, alive unto ages of ages. This then is the ultimate aim of study, not to learn employability skills, but to hear our calling and nature's calling, to hear the vocation that is calling through both. And that vocation is to realize paradise. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. That was beautiful, and I'm sure the poets especially appreciated the poetry part. So we have a few questions in the Q&A, and I think a few other questions from the panels. Let's see where to start. Don Campbell asks, I would love to be able to find the Traherne quote read early on.
Well done. So would I. It's, if you give me 1 second, I may even be able to find it.
Well, and if
I'll have to get that to you later. It's from his triads, I believe. I have at the end of because of the way I've been trained as an academic, at the end of that talk that I've just given, I have a long bibliography, and because of the way that I have trained myself, I seem to have missed off that very reference, that bibliographic reference to Traherne. Is there any way that I can get that to people later?
Yeah. Don's on historical commission with me, so I'll send it to him if you send it to me.
Yeah, excellent. So many apologies for that, for my academic inefficiency.
It's okay. You make up for it with poetry. Let's see.
Yes.
Do you want to read the questions yourself and then?
I'm looking at the Q&A there. There's another comment from or question from Don. Since we have left Eden, we have learned a lot. Perhaps we've learned that we cannot live without this ecstasy and want to return home, bringing with us all that we have learned. Possible? Question mark. Possible. Well, I think one would have to say yes. Otherwise, what would have been what would be the point of the talk that I'm so and the talks that other people have given over the past couple of days, and also what would have been the point of the poetry and the point of sharing these things. But I do think it is true that should we, when we return to that garden of utter beauty and utter presence and utter harmony, also utter being ourselves, and where everything is itself and the way that it should be. When we do return to that garden, it will be, as you say, having learned much more. It won't be a return in the sense of just being there again and recognizing it. It will be a return, a deliberate return, a turn in which our awareness, I guess, our consciousness, if I can use that phrase, has moved on to a higher level, and will allow us to be there in the garden. And I guess the point is to know that we're in the garden too. Not just be there, but to know it. Oh, thank you, Claire. Claire says that was astounding. Thank you. Mary, thank you. Remarkable, much unusual, a valuable reminding. Thank you.
Paul, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Oh yeah, hi there, Paul.
Hey, Simon, good to see you. Hey, this would be could be a whole long conversation, but just your quick sense of how did the universities get away from what you're asking us to get back to, which I asked them to get back to in terms of what happened, that it turned into, no, it's about a job and not about knowledge and love and ecstasy and nature.
Yeah, I can't really speak of or for American universities. I'm not really aware what the system is like and how it's working, or how it's not working in America. If it's anything like in Britain, though, it's through selling its soul to the neoliberal cause, to managerialism, to terrible metaphors such as benchmarks and outcomes. It's through it's through using ugly language, and that ugly language is itself a manifestation of I don't know, of violence, I suppose. Yes, of a violent distrust of what may happen if we say, look, let's fall in love with what we're studying and see what happens. You know, we live in a world in which we're told that we have so many more choices than we used to have. You have this whole panoply of choice, and choice and my own individual ability to choose is the single utmost good. But within all of those choices, actually something gets crushed, and it is quality. It's the presence. It's something else. it's the reality of, it's not trusting what would happen in at that moment in a classroom, which is a wild moment. It's been called education, the proper kind of education has been called a beautiful risk. And we also, I suppose, we live in a world which is increasingly risk averse. We don't like taking risks. We like controlling things. We like controlling people. We control our children ever more. We control ourselves. Everything seems risky. And so I guess there's that need to control there. But that control itself just emerges from an ideology of managerialism, which crushes spirit, I think. Yeah, that's it. It's managerialism. It's terrible metaphors. It's control. It's lack of trust. It's love of choice for the sake of choice, and not seeing the wood for the trees.
Also, you can't grade it, I guess,
Well, yes, I mean that's that. Yeah, everything has to be counted. It's been said before. We live in a world in which the reign of quantity rules over everything. Everything has to be quantified. Everything has to be counted. Everything has to be split up into ever smaller parts, and everything has to be homogenized too. Yes, I better not go into the politics of my university, but a couple of courses which were very very successful have been discontinued, possibly because they didn't fit into the homogenization that is going on, which is also odd that the choice and the fetishization of choice in fact leads to homogenization and just everything being standard. I suppose if I don't know on which basis I can make my choice, then everything does have to be quantified for me. Everything does have to be standard. Not too different anyway. It might get scary.
Or you might also recommend the book that you edited on that question of what the Academy could be like.
And in which to which you also contributed a wonderful essay. Thank you, Lise. Thank you for mentioning it. Reenchanting the Academy, edited by Angela Voss, VOSS, Angela Voss and myself. Attempts to put forward a series of differing points, differing perspectives, from which one could perhaps offer some resistance to the world to the reign of quantity and the way that we are forced into accepting to be counted as if we were all uniform creatures. Yes, I mean, which gets back to nature, doesn't it? And the counting, the homogenization, the way that everything is standardized in a way that as anyone who spends any time observing, studying nature knows is simply beyond the point. Really, it's not the point at all, because it's in, as I tried to express, and as has been said by other people, it's in particular relationships and the particularities of the person who's looking at me and at whom I am looking, and in what goes on, the third thing that goes on in that relationship, what goes on as those gazers mesh and meld and mix. I think I'm missing. Here we go. Simon, what is Simon's website? So I was also failing to use the question and answer. It's called scrolling, isn't it? What is Simon's website? Simon is working on his website. At the moment, if anyone wants to contact me, then it's simon.wilson@canterbury.ac.uk. Lise has my address. I am working on a website that to try to give expression, I guess, on the internet, a place that I have shied away from hitherto, but I'm finding that it's necessary. So as soon as I have one, it will be announced to the world with fanfares and a beautiful moment of radiance. Sorry, Lise.
I'm sorry. I wanted people to know that in the follow-up email that they'll receive from the conference, you gave your email in that as a way for them to reach you.
Yes, so I'd be very, I would be delighted if someone wanted to contact me to have a dialogue, discussion. Oh, whose bust oversees my study? That's Mr. Phonology. He's it's a phrenology bust. Phrenology was the 19th century science, pseudoscience of bumps on the head. To reading particular bumps would tell you, would give you insight into a person's character, whether a person was, there's a bump here. If a person has a particularly pronounced lump that just there, then they are literally observing, knowing. There's a strange thing here which says that you're good at languages. So yes, it's a Mr. Phonology bust. When I was young, I used to go on holiday to a place at the English seaside. It was a very working class place, very simple, and it was at a time when things like divination, reading people's palms, indeed reading people's lumps on their head, the bumps, the phonology, still went on. And I was absolutely fascinated by a window in this small town. It must have been a window to someone's studio where they would tell your future. And in this window, there's a phonology bust, and I've always wanted one, and now I have one. And it's been it's now been noticed. So it's gleeful. Control includes determining the range of choices. And it includes also not giving us, denying us the ability to make choices, in the sense that it denies us the philosophical or metaphysical or spiritual or religious, choose your word, basis on which true choice can be made. And it leaves us just thrashing around like a fish out of water, looking and knowing that choices must be made, but not having a true sense of proportionality, I guess, to the world, and to the presence in the world of truth, and of I would say God, beauty.
There's a comment in chat.
Yes, indeed.
Anna, do you want to read yours, or? No? Okay.
You can read it, yeah. You can. Thanks.
She says, quality of attention is a beautiful notation, and there's a humbleness in that. Can you talk more about this attention?
Well, I think it really is just imagine looking into the eyes of your beloved, looking at your beloved's mouth, looking at your beloved. I guess that's the quality of attention. I'm talking about a loving vulnerability to the other person. And when I say person, I don't just mean a human person. It would be to any fully or any full presence, I think is the word, any full presence of an animal, of a bird, it's the attention that I suppose that I try to bring out with Adam's gazing, how I see it anyway, with love at the creatures. But it's not a one-way thing. It's being gazed at back to. There's a wonderful quotation. If you just allow me, I'm aware of time. There's a wonderful quotation from an Orthodox theologian called Pavel Florensky, who's Russian. He was murdered by the Soviets. But he describes. He's talking about knowledge, and I think that maybe this gets it. It also describes study. He says, knowing is not the capturing of a dead object by a predatory subject of knowledge, but a living moral communion of persons, each serving for each as both object and subject. Strictly speaking, only a person is known, and only by a person. So yeah, there you have it. A living moral communion of persons, each serving for each as both object and subject, and both offering themselves, I suppose. But it's only in the one has to take the risk of that kind of attention, of that loving gaze, which doesn't want to consume and which doesn't want to possess and doesn't want to kill. One has to admit to the vulnerability of that gaze, that look, to then be looked at in return in that loving way. A quality of attention. Yeah, there is, and it's something that can be evoked. I think that's the final thing I'll say. It's something that can be evoked, but I don't know if it's something that can be truly defined. That's the best I can do.
Thank you.